I've decided to say goodbye to my Sony A7III, and it's really kind of bittersweet because it is a fantastic camera. Since I've got the A7 IV, the gap between the two is just too big to ignore. In this video, I'm going to break down why I'm saying goodbye to the A7 III, even though it is an absolute workhorse of a camera, as well as discussing whether or not you should buy it going into 2025. So the EVF, which is the electronic viewfinder, this was actually one of the biggest issues that a lot of people had with the camera. For a lot of people, the A7 III was their first mirrorless camera. So coming from DSLR, looking through that very clear mirror and going to a screen that was, really tiny and not that high resolution was quite difficult. Now, when you compare the EVF on the A7 III to the A7 IV, the difference is huge. And obviously Sony has released a bunch of new cameras since the A7 III, and again, it's a big difference when it comes down to the EVF. Comparing the A7 III to the A7 IV, the A7 IV's EVF is incredibly clear and bright compared to the A7 III. And this was an improvement that a lot of people were happy with when the A7 IV was released. Unfortunately, I can't really show the EVF here in a video, but just take my word for it, okay? The difference between the two is pretty big. And then you have the LCD on the rear of the cameras. So the A7 III, when it was released, had this very angled screen, and although it is good in most situations, it is pretty terrible in direct sunlight because it just isn't that bright. Now, comparing the two here, you can see that the A7 IV on the right is so much brighter, and this is just in a normal sort of indoor setup. Now imagine taking this outside and the difference is going to be pretty big. Again, this is difficult to capture on video, but just trust me, the A7 III's screen outdoors is really difficult to use. The A7 IV, on the other hand, is sharp, really clear, and we also get some touchscreen features that you don't get on the A7 III. Now, it's not just the brightness of the screen that's an issue when you compare these two cameras. Something I really love about the A7 IV is the very angled screen, so you can basically shoot with this camera in any different orientation and be able to see the screen. We've already mentioned the very angled screen on the A7 III, and this was a big problem for a lot of people, especially if you want to shoot in portrait mode at low angles. This is where the A7 III really suffers, and to be honest, at this point in time, I'm finding myself shooting a lot more like that, and the A7 III just isn't any good for that type of shooting situation. If you're someone that shoots low down and in portrait mode, then the A7 IV is the camera you want. And of course, with the A7 III, you can't rotate the screen around to look at yourself if you're recording yourself. Now, I'm not really someone that does a lot of that, so it's not a huge issue for me. But with the A7 IV, again, just turn the screen around, film yourself, it's so good. So another reason that I moved away from the A7 III and stuck mostly with the A7 IV is the autofocus. So the A7 III, when it first came out, had incredible autofocus, and it was like a complete game changer. The A7 III was, and I think still is, one of the best-selling mirrorless cameras to date, and for most people, the autofocus is good, it's fine. But when you get the A7 IV, and to be honest, any of Sony's newer cameras, even when I had the ZV-1, that camera, in my opinion, outperformed the A7 III, you can really tell how the A7 III just doesn't have as good autofocus performance. And if you take a look at this example where I'm trying to, keep Ash in focus here, the A7 III is really struggling. You can see it dipping in and out of focus all the time. Whereas on the A7 IV, this is locking on. Like, this is perfect. So yeah, with the A7 IV, I'm missing fewer shots. I'm getting more shots in focus and a lot sharper than the A7 III. And when it comes to video, the A7 IV is just leagues ahead. So one of the issues a lot of people had with the A7 III is it only has 8-bit video and it only goes up to 4K 30, whereas the A7 IV shoots 4K 60 and 10-bit. Now with the A7 IV, you get 7K footage oversampled in 4K 30, which gives you incredible footage, and you get 10-bit as well. And if we look at some of Sony's more recent cameras, the A6700 for example, that records at 120 FPS in 4K. And to be honest, that's probably the camera I might look at getting to replace the A7 III. Quite honestly, when it comes to video, the only reason you'd want an A7 III is maybe for a B-roll camera, maybe just as a backup, but in most situations, the A7 IV is going to be the better choice. And when it comes to autofocus, I'd even push to say that something like the ZV-1 or the ZV-E10 would be a better choice over the A7 III. And of course, it's not just about the big spec differences. The A7 IV has some major improvements like the improved menu system. There's also the dial at the top that lets you switch between photo and video mode, and this is really handy because the A7 III didn't ever have that. You just had to press the record button on the back, and that was always a bit fiddly to use, whereas on the A7 IV we've got these dedicated buttons. And that is basically why I sold the A7 III. It is a great camera, don't get me wrong. If you're looking at getting a mirrorless camera and you've never had one before, maybe you're coming from like a really old DSLR, then the A7 III is going to blow your mind. But if you're someone that really wants the best, then the A7 IV is going to give you way more options and a much more streamlined shooting experience in both photo and video modes. And I guess you want to know, would I recommend the A7 III in 2025? This is a hard one to answer because honestly, I probably wouldn't. I would say get the A7 IV, maybe look at Sony's APS-C cameras, maybe even the ZV-E10 II. Is that what it's called? The ZV-E10 II? I think it is. Because the A7 III really has those issues when it comes to the screen quality, the EVF, the autofocus reliability, and now in 2025, those things are going to be quite important. And since moving to the A7 IV, I've seen a big change in how I shoot. I'm a lot more confident with the camera because it gives you so much more flexibility and more options to shoot with. If the A7 III is going to be your first ever mirrorless camera and you've never used a mirrorless camera before, maybe you're coming from a DSLR, you may even be coming from film, maybe. I know there's someone out there that's still shooting on film. Then the A7 III might be a great choice because you can get it pretty cheap nowadays and it's still going to give you some fantastic photo results. Just don't expect to be pushing the boundaries with video. So which camera will you be getting? Will you be getting the A7 III or has this video changed your mind? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, it really helps out my channel. If you want to see more from me, subscribe, hit that bell icon as well, and you'll be notified when I upload another video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.